Sometimes an RPG feels like it's pulling you in two directions at once. One moment you're immersed in a heartfelt story, the next you're thrown into slapstick humor or tonal whiplash that doesn't quite fit. These shifts can leave players wondering what the game wants them to feel, and that uncertainty chips away at immersion. When tone isn't consistent, even strong mechanics or visuals struggle to hold the experience together. Let's explore how these mismatched moods break the flow and why they matter for player trust. Inconsistent tone in RPGs refers to moments where the emotional or narrative atmosphere shifts in ways that feels mismatched or jarring. The game might move from a serious drama to sudden comedy, or from light-hearted adventure to grim violence, without prepping the player for the change. These tonal clashes can confuse the audience, weaken immersion, and make it harder to trust the story's direction. Understanding this concept is key, because tone sets the emotional rhythm for play. To see how it plays out in practice, let's look at examples where mismatched moods disrupted the flow and left players questioning the experience. Comic relief characters overused. Comic relief characters are designed to ease tension, but when their humor intrudes on pivotal story beats, the tone of the narrative begins to fracture. Instead of balancing drama, they risk undermining it. In Final Fantasy XV, Prompto's constant jokes often clash with the heavy themes of duty and loss, leaving players unsure whether to laugh or grieve. A similar issue appears in Tales of Symphonia, where Zelos' flirtatious antics interrupt tense arcs, making emotional scenes feel less impactful. When humor is misplaced like this, immersion weakens and emotional investment slips away, as the rhythm of the story shifts abruptly from heartfelt to comedic without warning. Romantic arcs colliding with the main plot. Romance can enrich character depth, but when it arrives at the wrong moment, it disrupts the tone of the larger story. Instead of complementing the stakes, it risks pulling focus away from them. In Mass Effect 3, players often find themselves navigating tender romance scenes while the galaxy faces imminent destruction, creating a tonal clash between intimacy and urgency. Similar tension appears in Persona 5, where dating side stories unfold alongside battles against existential threats, leaving the emotional rhythm uneven. When romance is woven in without the regard for pacing, it can feel disconnected from the main arc, weakening immersion and confusing the player's sense of priority. Villain mood swings. Villains set the emotional stakes of an RPG, but when their tone shifts unpredictably, the story's tension begins to unravel. A character who is menacing in one moment yet comically bumbling in the next leaves players unsure how seriously to take the threat. In Final Fantasy IX, Kuja oscillates between flamboyant theatrics and genuine menace, creating a tonal imbalance that weakens his role as a consistent antagonist. Likewise, in Kingdom Hearts, certain Disney villains swing between cartoonish humor and sudden gravitas, making their presence feel uneven. When a villain's tone isn't steady, the narrative loses its anchor, and players struggle to remain invested in the conflict. Side quests versus character arcs. Side quests can enrich an RPG's world, but when they interrupt or dilute a character's emotional journey, the tone of the story begins to feel uneven. A player might be deeply invested in a companion's personal struggle, only to be pulled away into trivial errands that clash with the weight of the moment. In Skyrim, heartfelt character arcs often sit alongside fetch-style quests that drain urgency from the narrative. Similarly, in The Witcher 3, Geralt's emotional depth can be undercut by comedic or mundane side errands, leaving the rhythm of his journey inconsistent. When side content doesn't respect the tone of character development, immersion falters, and the player's connection to the story weakens. Player choice versus canon tone. Dialogue options give players freedom, but when those choices clash with the intended tone of the story, the narrative can feel fractured. A serious plotline loses weight if the player can respond with sarcasm or humor that doesn't fit the moment. In Mass Effect, the Paragon and Renegade system sometimes allows quips or exaggerates aggression in scenes meant to carry emotional gravity, creating tonal dissonance. Similarly, in Fallout New Vegas, sarcastic dialogue options can undercut grim or morally complex situations, leaving the scene uneven. When player agency isn't aligned with the story's emotional rhythm, immersion suffers, and the narrative risks losing its coherence. Abrupt genre shifts in storytelling. Consistency in genre helps anchor tone. When a story suddenly pivots into a different style without build-up, the result can feel jarring. A grounded fantasy tale that turns into a parody or meta-commentary risks leaving its characters out of place. In Final Fantasy XV, the light-hearted road trip atmosphere shifts abruptly into tragedy, creating tonal whiplash that unsettles the narrative rhythm. Likewise, Nier Automata blends existential philosophy with quirky side quests, sometimes pulling players out of the gravity of its themes. When genre shifts aren't carefully integrated, the story's tone fractures, and immersion gives way to confusion. Across these examples, a clear pattern emerges. Tonal inconsistency often stems from how stories and characters are written, not just from atmosphere alone. To restore trust and flow, developers need strategies that align tone with narrative intent. Let's explore solutions that can help RPGs maintain consistency without sacrificing variety. Balancing comic relief with narrative weight. Balancing comic relief with narrative weight means ensuring humor supports rather than undermines dramatic moments. In Final Fantasy XV, Prompto's constant jokes could be scaled back during scenes of loss of duty, allowing the lightheartedness to shine in downtime instead of pivotal arcs. Likewise, Tales of Symphonia could frame Zelos' flirtatious antics as optional banter outside of tense story beats, keeping his personality intact without disrupting immersion. Other RPGs, such as Dragon Quest XI, experiment with this balance by reserving comic relief for lighter stretches of the journey, showing how humor can complement serious narrative turns rather than clash with them. When humor is timed to respect the emotional rhythm of a story, immersion is preserved, emotional investment deepens, and the overall tone feels consistent and satisfying. Integrating romance with plot stakes. Integrating romance with plot stakes means weaving emotional arcs into the larger narrative so they feel natural rather than disruptive. In Mass Effect 3, romance scenes could be reframed to heighten the urgency of galaxy-wide crises, showing how intimacy strengthens resolve instead of pulling focus away from it. Likewise, Persona 5 could tie dating side stories more directly to the Phantom Thieves mission, making relationships feel like a part of the fight against existential threats rather than a tonal detour. In other RPGs, such as Fire Emblem Awakening, experiments with this approach by linking romance mechanics to the broader war narrative, ensuring that personal bonds reinforce rather than clash with the stakes. When romance is aligned with the momentum of the plot, it deepens character investment and enriches the story without breaking its rhythm. Keeping villains tonally consistent. Keeping villains tonally consistent means ensuring their presence anchors with the narrative rather than destabilizing it. In Final Fantasy IX, Kuja's oscillation between flamboyant theatrics and genuine menace could be refined by reserving his dramatic flair for moments of triumph, while keeping his darker side steady during confrontations, so players always feel the weight of his threat. Similarly, Kingdom Hearts could frame Disney villains with a clearer tonal boundary, allowing their continuous humor to remain in lighter segments while their gravitas dominates key battles. In other RPGs, such as The Witcher 3, experiment with this balance by presenting antagonists whose menace is unwavering even when surrounded by eccentric side characters. When villains maintain a consistent tone, they provide a stable emotional anchor, ensuring the story's conflict feels credible and immersive. Aligning side quests with character arcs. Aligning side quests with character arcs means designing optional content to complement rather than distract from emotional journeys. In Skyrim, heartfelt companion stories could be protected from tonal disruption by limiting fetch-style errands during these arcs, ensuring the player's focus stays on the character's struggle. Similarly, The Witcher 3 could frame Geralt's lighter errands as natural breaks between heavier beats, so his emotional depth isn't undercut by triviality. Other RPGs, such as Dragon Age Inquisition, experiment with this approach by weaving personal quests into the broader war effort, making side content feel like an extension of character development rather than a detour. When side quests respect the tone of character arcs, immersion strengthens and the player's connection to the story remains intact. Aligning player choice with canon tone. Aligning player choice with canon tone means designing dialogue options that reflect the emotional weight of the story rather than pulling it in conflicting directions. In Mass Effect, the Paragon and Renegade system could be refined so that even humorous or aggressive responses still carry the gravity of galaxy-wide crises, ensuring the player's agency doesn't fracture the tone. Similarly, Fallout New Vegas could limit sarcastic options during morally complex scenes, keeping the focus on the tension of the moment. Other RPGs, such as Disco Elysium, experiment with this approach by offering diverse choices that remain tonally consistent with the protagonist's fractured psyche, allowing freedom without breaking immersion. When dialogue options are aligned with the intended emotional rhythm, player agency feels authentic, while the story's coherence remains intact. Managing genre shifts smoothly. Managing genre shifts smoothly means preparing the player for tonal changes so they feel like natural evolution rather than a sudden jolt. In Final Fantasy XV, the transition from light-hearted road trip camaraderie to tragedy could be softened by foreshadowing the darker turn earlier, allowing the shift to feel earned instead of abrupt. Likewise, Nier Automata could better frame its quirky side quests as deliberate contrasts that highlight the weight of its existential themes, rather than leaving them disconnected. Other RPGs, such as Chrono Trigger, experiment with this approach by gradually layering humor, drama, and high stakes across its arcs, ensuring each tonal shift feels like a part of a larger rhythm. When genre changes are integrated with care, the story maintains coherence, and players experience variety without losing immersion. Solutions like these aren't just about fixing isolated problems, they're about shaping a more cohesive experience where tone and story move together. When developers treat consistency as a design priority, every choice, from dialogue to side quests, becomes a part of a larger rhythm. That rhythm is what keeps players immersed, trust in the narrative, and willing to follow it wherever it leads. With that in mind, let's step into the closing thoughts and consider what this means for the future of RPG storytelling. Stories live or die by the trust they build with players, and tone is the thread that holds that trust together. When it's steady, players feel safe to invest their emotions. When it wavers, immersion slips away. RPGs have the power to carry us through laughter, heartbreak, and triumph, but only if those shifts feel earned. As you think about the games you've played, consider this. What kind of tonal journey keeps you most engaged? And how might the future RPGs honor that rhythm more faithfully? Thanks guys for watching, and as always, stay safe everyone. Bye for now.